33. The Neume. We shall, then, examine how Rousseau operates when, for example, he attempts to define the limit of possibility of the thing whose impossibility he describes, the natural voice or the inarticulate language. No longer the animal cry before the birth of language, but not yet the articulated language, already shaped and undermined by absence and death. Between the prelinguistic and the linguistic, between cry and speech, animal and man, nature and society, Rousseau looks for a limit being born, and he gives it several determinations. There are at least two of them that have the same function. They relate to childhood and to God. In each, two contradictory predicates are united. It is a matter of language uncontaminated by supplement to writing. The model of this impossible and natural voice is first that of childhood. Described in the conditional in the essay, let us recall the analysis of the natural voices that are not articulated. Consider it now in Emile. The alibi and the in illo tempore are no longer Chinese or Greek, but the child. All our languages are the result of art. It has long been a subject of inquiry whether there ever was a natural language common to all. No doubt there is, and it is the language of children before they begin have learned to speak. This language is inarticulate, but it has tone, stress, and meaning. The use of our own language has led us to neglect it so far as to forget it altogether. Let us study children and we shall soon learn it afresh from them. Nurses can teach us this language. They understand all their nurslings say to THM, they answer THM, and keep up long conversations with them, and though they use words, these words are quite useless. It is not the sense of the word, but its accompanying intonation accent that is understood. P 45, italics added, P 32. To speak before knowing how to speak, such is the limit toward which Rousseau obstinately guides his repetition of origin. This limit is indeed that of non-supplementarity, but as there must already be language there, the supplement must announce itself without having been produced. Lack and absence muse T have begun without beginning. Without the summons of the supplement, the child would not speak at all. If he did not suffer, if he lacked nothing, he would not call, he would not speak. But if supplementarity had simply been produced, if it had really begun, the child would speak knowing how to speak. The child speaks before knowing how to speak. He has language, but what is lacking in it is the power of replacing itself, of substituting one sign for another, one organ of expression for another. What he lacks is, as the essay said, let us recall, a power proper to man, according to which he uses his organs in this way, and which, if he lacked these, would lead him to use others to the same end. P 10. The concept of the child is the concept of one who has no more than one language because he has only one organ. And that signifies that his lack, his unease itself, is unique and uniform, not countenancing any substitution or any operation of supplementing. Such is Rousseau's child. He has no language because he has only one. He has only one language because he has, so to say, only one kind of discomfort. In the imperfect state of his sense organs he does not distinguish their several impressions, all else produce one feeling of sorrow. P 46, Emile, P 32. The child will know how to speak when one form of his unease can be substituted for another, then he will be able to slip from one language to another, slide one sign under another, play with the signifying substance, he will enter into the order of the supplement, here determined as the human order, he will no longer weep, he will know how to say I hurt. When children begin to talk they cry less. This progress is quite natural, one language supplants another. When once Emile has said, it hurts me, it will take a very sharp pain to make him cry. P 59, Emile, P 41 to speak before knowing how, childhood is good because speech is good, the property proper of man. The child speaks. Childhood is good because the knowledge of speech comes only with the evil of articulation. The child does not know how to speak. But childhood is not good since already it speaks, and it is not good because it does not have the property and the good of man, knowledge of speech. Whence the regulated instability of the judgments on childhood, for better and for worse, it is sometimes on the side of animality, sometimes on the side of humanity. That the child speaks without knowing how to speak, that may be to his credit, but he also speaks without knowing how to sing, which is why he is no longer an animal that neither speaks nor sings, and not yet a man who both speaks and sings. Man has three kinds of voice, the speaking or articulate voice, the singing or melodious voice, and the pathetic or accented voice, which serves as the language of the passions, and gives life to song and speech. The child has these three voices, just as the man has them, but he does not know how to use them in combination. Like us, he laughs, cries, laments, shrieks, and groans, but he does not know how to combine these inflections with speech or song. These three voices find their best expression in perfect music. Children are incapable of such music, and their singing lacks feeling. In the same way their spoken language lacks expression, they shout, but they do not speak with emphasis, and there is as little power in their voice as there is emphasis in their speech. Emile, pages 161 to 62, p. 113. Articulation, wherever one finds it, is indeed articulation, that of the members cdd the organs, difference, in the self-same, proper body. Is not breath seemingly the most appropriate thing for effacing this difference in natural expression? A speaking and singing breath of language which is nonetheless inarticulate. Such a breath cannot have a human origin and a human destination. It is no longer on the way to humanity like the language of the child, but is rather on the way to superhumanity. Its principle and its end are theological, as the voice and providence of nature. It is on this onto theological model that Rousseau regulates his repetitions of origin. With this exemplary model of a pure breath, Neume, and of an intact life, of a song and an inarticulate language, of speech without spacing, we have, even if it is placeless atapic or utopian, a paradigm suitable to our measure. We can name and define it. It is the Neume, pure vocalization, form of an inarticulate song without speech, whose name means breath, which is inspired in us by God and may address only him. The dictionary of music defines it as such, Neume. S.F. A term in church music. The Neume is a kind of short recapitulation of the air in a mode, which is made at the end of an antiphon, by a simple variety of sounds, and without joining to them any words. The Catholics authorize this singular custom on a passage of St. Augustine, who says, that no words being possible to be worthy of pleasing God, it is laudable to address him in a confused music of jubilation. For to whom is such a jubilation suitable, unless to an ineffable being? And how can we celebrate this ineffable being, since we cannot be silent, or find anything in our transports which can express them, unless unarticulated sounds? Italics added. pp. 270 to 71. To speak before knowing how to speak, not to be able either to be silent or to speak, this limit of origin is indeed that of a pure presence, present enough to be living, to be felt in pleasure fouissance j, but pure enough to have remained unblemished by the work of difference, inarticulate enough for self-delight fouissance de soi j, not to be corrupted by interval, discontinuity, alt writing. Indeed, Rousseau thinks that this experience of a continual present is accorded only to God, given to God or to those whose hearts accord and agree with God's. It is indeed this accord, this resemblance of the divine and the human that inspires him when he dreams, in the reveries, of that experience of a time reduced to presence, where the present lasts forever, without marking its duration in any way, and without any trace of succession. Po 113j. Let us reread all these pages. They speak the sorrow of time in its presence by memory and anticipation. Ti1e pleasure since J of a continuous and inarticulate presence is a nearly impossible experience. Scarcely is there, in our most living delights, a moment where the heart can truly say to us, I wish that this moment should last forever. pp. 112-13. The heart is not an organ because it is not inscribed with a system of differences and articulations. It is not an organ because it is the organ of pure presence. Rousseau experienced this nearly impossible state on the island of St. Pierre. Much has been written 55 of that description on the themes of nature, water, flowing, etc. Comparing it to pure vocalization, to the pure vowels of the natural language and of the Neume, I shall extract from it only the system of 4 significations. The pleasure jollicence J of self-presence, pure auto-affection, uncorrupted by any outside, is accorded to God. What is the nature of pleasure in such a situation? Nothing external to oneself, nothing except oneself and one's own proper existence. So long as the state lasts, one suffices to oneself, like God. pp. 113-14. There must be movement, life, since J delight in time, self-presence there. But that movement should be without intervals, without difference, without discontinuity. There should be neither an absolute repose nor too much agitation, but a uniform and moderate movement which should have neither shocks nor intervals. Without movement, life is only a lethargy. If the movement is unequal or too strong, it awakens. The movement which does not come from without, then, is made within us. This movement is an inarticulate speech, a speech before words, alive enough to speak, pure, interior and homogeneous enough to relate to no object, to gather into itself no mortal difference, no negativity. It is a charm and therefore a song. If the movement is unequal or too strong, it awakens, in recalling us to environing objects. It destroys the charm of the reverie and draws us out of ourselves to put us in an instant under the yoke of fortune and man and to bring us back to the feeling of our unhappiness. An absolute silence leads to sadness. It offers us an image of death. p0115. Yet, if our hearts are pure enough for it, we live this almost impossible experience, that is almost alien to the constraints of supplementarity, already as a supplement, as a compensation diminishment J. And it is the difference between our experience and that of God himself, but an unfortunate who has been withdrawn from human society, and who can do nothing here below that is useful or good for himself or for others, can find in that state consolations diminishments for all human enjoyments which fortune and man cannot remove from him. It is true that these consolations cannot be felt bv all souls, nor in all situations. It is necessary that the heart should be at peace, and that no passion should come to trouble the compo 114. The difference between God and ourselves is that God distributes, and we receive, compensations. Rousseau's entire moral theology implies, and the vicar often uses this word, that divine solicitude can always procure just compensations. God alone may dispense with the supplement that he dispenses. He is the dispensation of, exemption from, the supplement. The Neume, the spell of self-presence, inarticulate experience of time, tantamount to saying, utopia. Such a language, since a language must be involved, does not, properly speaking, take place. It does not know articulation, which cannot take place without spacing and without organization of spaces. There is no language before differences of locale. The 4 chapters on general and local difference in the origin of languages, 8, formation of the southern languages, 9, formation of the languages of the north, 10, and reflections on these differences, 1 give the lie by their description to what seems required by the declared organization of the essay. What they describe is that before articulation, that is to say before local difference, there is nothing that one may call language. For we shall see that local differences between the 2 poles of language always amount to an articulatory play. One cannot therefore describe the structure or the general essence of the language without taking topography into account. Yet that is what Rousseau wanted to do by dealing with language in general before beginning the chapter on the general and local difference in the origin of languages. In doing so, he had believed it possible to dissociate structure from origin, or structural origin from local origin. All that I have said so far applies to primitive tongues in general, and to such development as is due merely to the passage of time. But it does not explain either their origin or their differences. Essay, p30j. Thus opens the 8th chapter. If it is true that hereafter articulation measures local difference and nothing precedes it within language, can one conclude from it that in the classification of languages, in their local or geographic distribution, in the structure of their development, there is no more than a play of correspondences, situations, relations? Can one conclude from it that there is no absolute, immobile, and natural center? There again, we must distinguish between description and declaration. Rousseau declares the center, there is one single origin, one single 0 point in the history of languages. It is the south, the warmth of life, the energy of passion. In spite of the apparent symmetry of the 2 chapters, in spite of that description of a double origin of which we have spoken above, Rousseau does not wish to speak of the 2 poles of formation, only of a formation and a deformation. Language truly forms itself only in the south. The originary center of language is well reflected in the center of the essay, in that chapter 9, which is by far the longest and richest of all. In spite of appearances, and contrary to what one might think, Rousseau does not here simply stop putting aside all the facts. No doubt the factual content is richer than in the second discourse. But it functions as a structural index, with the consciousness of example which regulates the phenomenological intuition of essence. The first lines, the first note, already authorize this interpretation. In primitive times *, the sparse human population had no more social structure than the family, no laws but those of nature, no language, but that of gesture and some inarticulate sounds. *, I consider primitive the period of time from the dispersion of men to any period of the human race that might be taken as determining an epoch. Essay, p31j. The expression primitive times, and all the evidence which will be used to describe them, refer to no date, no event, no chronology. One can vary the facts without modifying the structural invariant. It is a time before time. In every possible historical structure, there seemingly would be a prehistoric, pre-social, and also pre-linguistic stratum, that one ought always to be able to lay bare. Dispersion, absolute solitude, mutism, experience irrevocably destined to a pre-reflexive sensation, immediate, without memory, without anticipation, without imagination, without the power of reason or comparison, such would be the virgin soil of any social, historic, or linguistic adventure. Recourse to factual illustration, even to events distant from the origin, is purely fictive. Rousseau is sure of that. And when we make objections to him on historical grounds, or when he seems to make similar objections to himself, in the name of verisimilitude or the compossibility of facts, he wheels around, reminds us that he could not care less about facts when he describes the origin and that he has given a definition of primitive times. I am told that Cain was a farmer and Noah planted grapes. Why not? They were solitaries. What did they have to fear? Besides, this does not conflict with my thesis. I have said what I understand by primitive times. Essay, p34. We have here another way into the problem of the relationships between the essay and the second discourse from the point of view of the state of pure nature. There is nothing before the primitive times and therefore no rigorously determinable discrepancy between the 2 texts. We suggested it above in connection with the age of huts. Now we must be more precise. At first reading, the discrepancy seems incontestable. The savage of the discourse wanders in the forests, without industry, without speech, and without home. Po 188j. The barbarian of the essay has a family, a cabin, and a language, even if he is reduced to gesture and some inarticulate sounds. Po 31j. But these discordancies do not seem pertinent from the point of view that interests us. Rousseau is not describing two different and successive states. The family, in the essay, is not a society. It does not limit the primi. The essay on the origin of languages tive dispersion. In primitive times the sparse human population had no more social structure than the family. Which signifies that this family was not a society. It was, as James Coney has called it, de supra, a pre-institutional phenomenon, purely natural and biological. It was the indispensable condition of that process of generations that the discourse also recognized, generations multiplied uselessly. This natural milieu, entailing no institution, had no true language. And after having attributed gesture and some inarticulate sounds to them as language, Rousseau is more precise in a note: genuine languages are not at all of domestic origin. They can be established only under a more general, more durable covenant. That American savages hardly speak at all except outside their homes. Each keeps silent in his hut, speaking to his family by signs. And these signs are used infrequently, for a savage is less disquieted, less impatient than a European, he has fewer needs and he is careful to meet them himself. To efface the contradiction or rigorous discrepancy between the two texts, one does not have to reduce them to repetitions or overlappings of each other. From one to the other, an emphasis is displaced, a continuous sliding is in operation. Or rather, without imputing any order of succession there, we may say that from the discourse to the essay the sliding movement is toward continuity. The discourse wants to mark the beginning, it therefore sharpens and radicalizes the characteristics of virginity within the state of pure nature. The essay would make us sense the beginnings, the movement by which men sparsely placed on the face of the earth, continuously wrench themselves away, within a society being born, from the state of pure nature. It captures man as he passes into birth, in that subtle transition from origin to genesis. These two projects do not contradict each other, one does not even have priority over the other, and, as I have noted above, the description of pure nature in the discourse made room within itself for such a transition. As always, it is the ungraspable limit of the almost. Neither nature nor society, but almost society. Society in the process of birth. The moment when man, no longer belonging, or almost not belonging, to the state of pure nature, which, the discourse clearly says, no longer exists, perhaps never did exist, and probably will never exist, and of which it is, nevertheless, necessary to have true ideas, in order to form a proper judgment of our present state, preface, p. 0155j, holds himself still short of society, or almost so. It is the only means of restoring the becoming culture of nature. The family, which Hegel too will call prehistoric, the hut, the language of gestures and inarticulate sounds, are the indications of that almost. The savage life of hunters, the barbaric and pre-agricultural life of shepherds, correspond to the state of almost society. As in the discourse, so in the essay society depends upon agriculture and agriculture upon metallurgy. Rousseau encounters here the problem of references to Holy Writ. One can in fact object that there was already a great deal of agriculture in the time of the patriarchs. The response further clarifies the status of factual history. The facts reported by the scriptures do not concern the state of pure nature. But instead of bluntly distinguishing between structural origin and empirical origin, a conciliatory Rousseau hides behind a biblical authority which furnishes him with a structural pattern, by admitting that the patriarchal age is much removed from the origins. All this is true. But the ages should not be confused. The patriarchal period that we know is very remote from primitive times. Scripture lists 10 intervening generations at a time when men were very long-lived. What did they do during these 10 generations? We know nothing about it. Living almost without society, widely scattered, hardly speaking at all, how could they write? And given the uniformity of their isolated life, what events would they have transmitted to us? Italics added. Essay, pp. 35-36. Rousseau adds another resource to this biblical one, the decadence or the redecline into barbarism after passing through agriculture. Thanks to a catastrophic event annulling progress and compelling repetition, structural analysis can recommence from zero. This confirms that the structural account does not follow a linear genesis but indicates permanent possibilities which may at any moment reappear in the course of a cycle. The nearly social state of barbarism may in fact exist before or after, indeed during, and under the state of Sakayev. Adam spoke, Noah spoke, but it is known that Adam was taught by God himself. In scattering, the children of Noah abandoned agriculture, and the common tongue perished with the first society. That had happened before there was any Tower of Babel. Essay, p. 36. Because there may always be a resurgence of dispersion, because its threat belongs to the essence of society, the analysis of the state of pure nature and the recourse to natural explanations is always possible. On that point Rousseau's procedure is reminiscent of Condillacs, who, while admitting that language was given by God as a finished product to Adam and Eve, supposes that sometime after the deluge two children, one male, and the other female, wandered about in the deserts, before they understood the use of any sign. Let me then be permitted to make the supposition, and the question will be to know, in what manner this nation first invented language. 57. This discourse, this detour, had already been practiced by Warbert and Condillac cites him, and what Kant will borrow in Die Religion inneral der Grenzen der Blossen Vernunft * will at least be analogous. If there was then a slight shift from the discourse to the essay, it is the result of that continuous sliding, that slow transition from pure nature to the birth of society. This evidence is not so simple. For no continuity from inarticulate to articulate, from pure nature to culture, from plenitude to the play of supplementarity, is possible. The essay, having to describe the birth, the being born of the supplement, must reconcile the two times. The departure from nature is at once progressive and brutal, instantaneous and interminable. The structural caesura is trenchant but the historical separation is slow, laborious, progressive, imperceptible. On the issue of that double temporality, the essay again agrees with the discourse.